Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. So I tend to like applications that provide the capability to communicate, and particularly if they are private and self-hosted and that they also respect your privacy. And so I found one kind of like that today, and it has a few caveats, but I felt like it was really worth covering. This particular application is called Gryt, and it's spelled Gryt, and it is very new, only about a week or so old, and it comes out of a developer in Norway. So Gryt is basically a replacement or a self-hosted type of application similar to Discord that gamers use for their online communications. So if I click sign on with Gryt here, it goes ahead and comes up and gives me the option to sign on with a username and a password. And it's actually doing a sign on from the Keycloak authentication mechanism that the developer has running from their website. And I've not found a reasonable way to substitute that automated sign-on method with something locally here. So in lieu of that, that's what actually has to occur. And once that occurs, then I can go ahead and click sign in, and it goes ahead and signs into my Gryt-Chat. Not sure exactly how you pronounce Gryt, but I'm going to say Gryt is Gryt, or Gryt maybe. So in this particular case, you can see here that I have two other users besides myself, one of which is online and the other one is presently offline. And it starts with a text chat. So you can type a text chat to basically anyone that you have signed onto your server. Now the thing about the server is that even though you can create an account and you can log into that account, it doesn't mean that that person can connect to your server, because connecting to the server is by invitation only. And so if I go over here and I click on the option to configure the server, which is the server settings that you see here, it has a section called invites. And in this invite section, you can create invites for a particular user and they can join your server. Other than that, we have here the roles section, and we have the emojis, and we have an audit log, and then you have an option to replace a user. Not entirely sure what that means. And then we have a general chat, and we also have a random chat. If we click on random chat, it will start a so-called random channel. Not entirely sure what that is, but I know that the general chat ties together anyone who has joined your server and they can all communicate with each other. If we click on voice chat over here, it will open a menu in the lower left-hand corner, and it has actually started a voice communication. And over here, it should update and say that I am connected via voice. Hopefully, let's see if I go click on my microphone and unclick on my microphone to mute and unmute it, if that will update it here. Doesn't look like it did. Okay, fine. I'll disconnect and reconnect to voice chat. Oh, I know what I need to do. I need to click on my name. So once I click on my name, I think it comes online. There it goes. Now it says Scott is in voice. So I am now doing a voice chat. The other thing that we can do here is we can go down to the option to screen share. And so the screen sharing option has an option to share screens and also to share windows. So for example, if I said I wanted to share screen number 1, where I'm recording this video and it's running OBS Studio, I could go ahead and click that, and then anybody in this chat would be able to see my OBS screen. If I click on that, it will bring it up and make it larger, and of course it is doing the infinite view. I can make this thing completely full screen there, looking at it, and I might say that the external views of this are absolutely amazing. I hit escape to come out of it and another escape to go back out of here. And likewise, if I hit the red section down here, it will undo or turn off the sharing. So something pretty amazing about the sharing is the fact that you have the option to share at 30 frames per second and even all the way up to 60 frames per second. And in sessions I've had with people, they've been able to play a video remotely, and I've been able to see the video here in real time. Back in the main chat window, you'll see that you have an option to send various emoticons in your chat, but you also have the ability to put file attachments in here. So when I click on it, it will go ahead and open up the option to upload anything on my system and use it as an attachment that anyone else can download. Going back to the sharing icon once again, you'll notice that not only can you share screens and windows, and you can include the system audio from that share coming or sending to the other side, but you can control the quality of the screen that you're sharing or the window that you're sharing, anywhere from native all the way up to 4K or 1080p or whatever other resolution you should decide to provide. In addition to that, you can also specify 30 frames per second, 60, 90, or even 120 frames per second, realizing that, of course, internet bandwidth matters. So I've never seen a chat program that can exchange video and play video real time without a lag or delay. And in my tests so far, I've discovered that it does pretty much that. In addition to screen sharing, we of course also have the ability to share your camera. So I can come down here and say start my camera, but in this case it says failed to start the camera. And the reason for that is because OBS Studio is presently using that. But you have the ability to start that, and you can specify also the video quality of the camera, and if you can make it the native mode, or you can pick any other resolution. When that camera comes up, or when you're viewing somebody's remote camera, you can choose to look at the camera on the sidebar here by default, or you can make it full screen if you prefer. Once you're in a voice chat, of course, all these options open up to do the sharing. But if I was to hang up from the voice chat by hitting the telephone here marked in red, it will go ahead and close out those options for that screen for sharing. That being said, if I was to invoke a voice chat and to bring it up, I could mute my mic, and I can also even mute my speakers if so desired. The other thing that you can do here is you can add other servers. So suppose you wanted to communicate to people on other servers other than your own, you could click on add a new server, and when you add a server, you're going to give it a WebSocket secure connection, which is what the WSS is, and you would specify their URI for the WebSocket secure connection corresponding to their particular server. And of course, when you're looking at the chat window here, you can always scroll back and look at information from various times, and you can see whatever's out there. You can, of course, download the screen images that people may have pasted in. You also have the option to download any files that people have uploaded. So one example here is I displayed a picture which is just pasted into the chat. And if I click on that, it will go ahead and make that full screen. And up here, I have a download option to save that image to my local system if so desired. All right, so I just noticed that if I clicked on this X up here, it was completely exiting the chat. I just needed to click away from that screen or hit an escape key and it would have returned to the chat properly. But that X that was exposed up here was actually exiting the entire application. One of the other great features here is that you can always send offline messages to people. So anything that I would type in here in the chat, like this is a test again, would be received by anyone if they were online or offline. So here there's one other user that's online, but they may or may not be receiving that message. But the offline user, when they reconnect to the system, they will be able to see any messages I've typed in, even while they were offline. So in general, I'm pretty excited about Gryt-Chat. I think it's a really great product overall, and it seems to perform really reliably. The only downside or caveat that you should be aware of is that original authentication that you have to perform ends up going through that other server, that Keycloak OIDC server that is offered by the author. And so I don't see a necessary problem in that, since the entire chat itself can be self-hosted on a server. And so with that in mind, let's go find out how to build our own Gryt-Chat self-hosted server. Here's Scott from the future to point out that this project is evolving extremely quickly, and today is March 9th, 2026. And in the new client, when you invoke the startup, it comes up and gives you now an advanced option. And this advanced option lets you specify your own auth server instead of using the auth server that is provided by the developer. And in this place, you might use something like Ophelia or Authentic, but that's out of scope for this particular presentation. In any event, the authentication server does not really store anything except for your username and password that you create initially. The actual chats are all going to run on your self-hosted server, and you're going to be sending invitations out to people to join your server. So that access that's provided at that centralized server really doesn't expose anything for access to your server per se. Here we are on the Gryt-Chat GitHub page, and for the best experience, this program is really designed to be used with a specific client rather than being web accessible. And so if you scroll down the page here and you click on releases, and then you look at the latest release and you open up the assets section, there are clients that you can download. For example, the app image client or the Deb client for Ubuntu or Debian based operating systems. And then we have a Windows portable client and a Windows installable client. So let's go ahead and install our own Gryt-Chat self-hosted server. And like I usually do on the channel, I'm going to go ahead and start by installing it or creating an Incus container to install it. So I'm doing an Incus launch on images, Ubuntu 24.04. I'm calling the name of the container Gryt. I'm giving it the default profile, and from my tutorial Incus container step by step, I'm also adding the bridge profile. The purpose for that is to provide access to our container directly from my LAN by giving the container and address on the LAN. We have boot.autostart equals to true, and we have security.nesting equals to true because we're implementing Gryt inside of an Incus container. Now that we have our new container up and running, let's go ahead and move inside of it with an Incus shell to Gryt. Whenever you create a new container, the best practice, I should say, would be to go out and take all of the updates. And so we're doing an apt update, & apt upgrade, just to make sure that our container is completely up to date. And as you can see here, it is taking a few updates. Now, once this is done, and it is right now, let's go ahead and add some dependencies. So I'm installing OpenSSH Server just so I can go out and manage the container in the future. I'm installing the Nano text editor, net-tools, so it's convenient to find addresses of my interfaces, and we're also installing curl. The -y means don't prompt me, just go off and do the installation. Now that the basic dependencies are installed, one of the other things I want to do is install Docker from the script on the Docker website. So I go ahead and do that. Now that Docker's installed, I'm going to go ahead and create myself a user account with an add user Scott. Provide Scott with the password. And now since we have Docker installed, we're going to go ahead and add the Scott account to both the sudo and the Docker groups with the usermod -a capital G sudo, Docker Scott. Go ahead and su over to the Scott account with an su space -- Scott. And now we're going to go ahead and create a folder called Gryt and move inside of that Gryt folder. Now Gryt's fairly easy to install. We just have to go get the Docker compose file, and we can do that with a curl on that Docker compose from the GitHub site, and it goes ahead and pulls that down, and then we can do a pull on the .env environment variables file with another curl command. Next, we want to do a nano on the .env template file that we just downloaded, and it has a number of things in it. Let me go through some of the customizations that I made here on my .env file. And so you're going to want to leave the server name at latest, or you can tag it to a particular Docker version number. The selective forwarding unit component I also have set at latest. And then for the client version, I have it set as latest. You probably don't want to change any of those. You have some customization options in that you can change your server name. I changed mine to Scotti-BYTE Gryt server, and the server description I've changed to Scotti-BYTE voice chat server. I've left the server password to null, and that seems to be desirable. And down here on the course origin, you probably don't want to change it either, although there are options to be able to run your own locally hosted web-based chat client, but the web-based chat client does not provide the best experience as opposed to the installable client that we mentioned earlier from the GitHub page. One thing you're definitely going to want to change is your selective forwarding unit public host address. And so this uses WSS, which is WebSocket Secure, and then you're going to specify your subdomain name. So you're going to go out to your DNS provider and create yourself a domain name for Gryt. I created gryt.scotti-byte.com, And here I put gryt.scotti-BYTE.com/client because after quite a bit of research, I discovered that that was my required endpoint. And then the client port should remain at 3666 for the purposes of this video. The server port should also remain at 5000. The SFU, or Selective Forwarding Unit port, should be 5005. And then I set up a port range for my WebRTC media, and that is to support the various users that may be in your chat for communicating via voice and also text. So the issue with this was that originally it was set up beginning at port 10,000, but since I run a Jitsi server uses and exposes port 10,000 UDP, and so part of this is we're going to have to do some port forwards on our router, which I will cover later, but I picked ports 10,050 through 10,070. And then there is an option to set up the default port for your ICE UDP MUX port. And by default, this is 443. And so Nginx Proxy Manager uses port 443. So I changed this to port 4443, which will also be another port forward that we're going to be setting up. And then we have the public ICE server setting here. Here I set my WAN address. I'm not sure if you can set this up as being a domain name. I think this specifically must be a dotted IP address. And so that may be a bit of a shortcoming in terms of configuring the server if you have a WAN address that changes. And so down here we have the stun servers, and disable stun is equal to false, and we're just using the Google stun servers, which seems to work just fine. The next thing, and I just put some random characters in here, but you're going to want to go out and do an open SSL rand-base64 and create a 48-bit key. And when you run that command, you'll get back a character string that'll look something like this crazy string that I just entered for the purposes of this video here. And you're going to want to put that in as your secret to perform the encryption on the server. If we move down here, we have the Gryt auth mode is equal to required, and the OIDC issuer is set up to point out to the one that the author is providing. And in this particular case, I don't really see that as a problem because it's just to create that user account to connect to your own server. And it does have that custom option that I showed earlier if you have your own OIDC issuer, and that could be something like Authentic or Athelia. So you could certainly set that up because that's the last piece of the puzzle there. And then the OIDC audience here, I'm not sure exactly how that works, but it points out the Gryt web option. And then here we have the API for that authentication mechanism. And then here I have the Gryt OIDC realm and the OIDC client ID. And needless to say, you would be changing that if you were using something like Athelia or Authentic, and again, kind of out of scope. Then you can go down here and change the min.io root user name or password. And then finally, they have an option to use S3, which I'm not using, but I just left that alone. So we'll go ahead and do a Control-O and Enter to write the file out, and a Control-X to exit the Nano editor. Since we installed net-tools, we can do an if config here to list the addresses of our adapters. And we're going to want to note the address of ETH0 if you're creating this inside of an Incus container. Here we are over on my Nginx proxy manager, and you'll notice that this is my existing production server, so the address that we just saw is not the same. But here I'm putting in the domain name for my proxy host to be gryt.scotti-BYTE.com, and of course that has to match the domain name of whatever subdomain you created over on your DNS service provider. We want the scheme to be HTTP, and we want the forward host to be the address of the container, the Incus container we just created. And then we have the forward port at port 5000. We want to turn on block common exploits and turn on WebSocket support. Then head over to the SSL tab and request a new certificate. And when you request a new certificate, after you create that by clicking save, you're going to want to come back in and turn on force SSL and HTTP/2 support. Next, we need to set up our port forwards, and here we are on my Ubiquiti UDM Pro, and I go down to the settings option. Once the setting page comes up, I'm going to scroll down to where my port forwards are listed, and in my particular case, I'm going to my second page of port forwards because I have many of them. There's going to be 3 port forward entries. The first is going to be for Gryt Web RTC Audio, or that's what I called it, and that is going to be port number 4443 from outside the network, forwarded to port 4443 inside the network to whatever the address is of your container where you installed Gryt. And then it's going to be a UDP protocol port forward. The second port forward is for that Gryt SFU signaling and control. That's a TCP port, and that's port number 5005, and it's going to be forwarded from port 5005 outside your network to port 5005 inside your network. And finally, we're going to have the Gryt UDP range that we defined in the .env file, and that is going to be a range of UDP ports. And in the configuration file, you'll remember that I specified port 10,050 to 10,070 from both outside the network to inside the network, again at the address of the container where we installed Gryt-Chat. So now, just to review, now that we have our 3 port forward settings completed and we have our Nginx proxy manager host at port 5000, we're ready to head to the next step. Recall that back inside of the env file, that's where we have port 5000 for the server port defined for the Nginx proxy manager entry. And then we have the SFU port of port 5005 as a port forward. And that particular port forward is for that selective forwarding unit. So the SFU, or selective forwarding unit, is a media server used in WebRTC for voice or video systems that receives audio and video streams from participants and forwards the selective streams to other participants. And then we have our SFU port range of 10,050 to 10,070, which, as you'll recall, was the other port forward. Well, and last but not least, I almost forgot the ICE port forward, which was at port 4443. Now that we have everything configured, the only thing left to do is a docker compose up up-D, and it looks like we have an error. So let's go ahead and do a nano on docker-compose.yml. And like I said, this thing is in rapid development, and it basically says that there is a problem with the health check test. So let's go ahead and look for, we'll do a Control W and look for health check. And see if we can find that code. And there's one health check, but that's not the one that we're looking for. So we'll do another look for health check. And that's also not the one that we're looking for. We'll do another search. And it looks like this one may be the one with the issue, because this test here should probably be escaped twice. So we'll go ahead and put another $sign in there, do a Control O and enter to write the file out, and a Control X to exit the nano editor, and then a docker compose up-D. And sure enough, that fixed it. Well, there's no accounting for beta software. Sometimes you run into an error, but simply read what the error says, and you should be able to modify the code successfully and correct whatever the error happens to be. Once the application starts, you'll notice that it says that the server data init exited, and also the min.io init exited, and apparently these are processes that run initially but exit later on. When I did a docker ps on my system, I noticed that there are 4 containers that are up and running healthy. I can also do a docker compose logs and see what we've got out here, and I'm not really noticing any errors. Everything seems to be up and running. It says the Scotti-BYTE Gryt server is up and running, and everything looks like it's ready. The SFU server is ready, and starting the HTTP server on port 5005. If you haven't already, you want to go ahead and go back and look at the releases for Gryt-Chat and go under the assets. In my particular case, I downloaded the Gryt-Chat deb client and did an install on that on my Ubuntu system. I could have used the app image also. If you're using Windows as your desktop client, then you want to go ahead and install or download the portable version, or go ahead and install the full version from the .exe file here. And so I've downloaded my deb version on my Ubuntu desktop. When I run that desktop client, it's going to come back and say sign on with Gryt. And when I click that button, it will go ahead and open a web page on whatever your default browser is. And at this point, since you don't have an account, you're going to have to go out and create an account, and you'll click on that option to go over and register. And once you register an account, you will have the ability to log in. And again, as I mentioned earlier, if you have Ophelia or Authentic installed, then you can go ahead and use it to set up your account and then point to that server through the advanced options. Once you do have an account, and I do here, I'm going to click here and use my Bitwarden to autofill those fields for my email and my password, and I click sign in. And once I click sign in, it will go ahead and fire up the client. My client automatically connected to my server because it's already configured. But to reproduce what you'll see, if I go down here and click on plus as though I'm going to add a new server, it will ask for the WSS. So this is where you're going to type in WSS : / and you're going to give your address. So in this particular case, mine is going to be gryt.dev Scotti-BYTE.com, and it says you're already a member of this particular server, but this is where you're going to enter yours. And when you do, it'll create an entry off to the right, and you'll be connected to that particular server. And so right now it's saying it can't access that server because we're already logged into it. So that's basically what it is in order to sign in. Now, once you do that, you'll be logged in, but you won't have any other users. So nobody can join your Gryt server without an invite. So the way you get other users on your server is you come up here and you click this down arrow next to your server name and go to server settings. And then you click on invites and you can say create an invite. And when you create an invite, then you can do just like this, and it creates a new invite, and you can go ahead and copy that and send it over to somebody else. And at that point, when you have that, when they accept that invite, then when they run the client and connect to your server, they'll be able to see the chat and be a member of the chat. And by the way, the invite contains the complete URL that is required to join your server, so they don't have to worry about specifying your server name. And so Gryt-Chat is a completely private server that is self-hosted on your home lab. And as such, you have the ability to control it, and you have the ability to invite whoever you want into it, and it serves as a private meeting space in order to share voice connections, video connections, files, and text chat. And I really find this a extremely powerful tool. So one final and very important disclaimer about Gryt-Chat is it's an extremely active development. And in fact, this particular project is really undergoing daily changes and should be considered to be in a beta state. But this was just really too good to ignore. And so I hope you'll try to self-host Gryt-Chat and try it out for yourself in your home lab and let me know what you think. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and don't forget to hit your notification bell, and we'll see you next time.